Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Operation Automation, How to Fast Track Your Shift from Manual Testing. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, at the bottom of your audience console, you'll find a number of widgets for questions and additional resources. When you have questions for the presenter during the webcast, please click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. We will answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar, and if we run out of time, we'll get back to you via email. Also, a copy of today's slide deck is available in the resources section at the bottom of your screen. We will also email you a link to the recording of this webinar within the next few hours. And if you need any tech support during the webinar, please use the help option. Next, I want to share some exciting news. In the next few days, we are going to be launching a new version of TestCraft, which will be known as Perfecto Scriptless. This tool will include all of the great features of TestCraft that you'll see a short demo of later in this webinar, as well as a wider array of complementary test automation services as part of the broader Perforce and Perfecto portfolios. Stay tuned for more details about this exciting transition happening soon. Plus, if you are interested in what you see today or want to take a deeper dive into what Perfecto Scriptless has to offer, there's a link in the resources section of your audience console where you can sign up for a custom one-on-one demo of the product with our experts. And with that, I will introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Nimrod Arbel, engineer here at Perforce. Nimrod, thank you for joining us on today's webinar.
Thanks, Shelby. Happy to be here, and thanks everyone for joining. My name is Nimrod. I'll be talking to you today about, again, how to fast-track your shift from manual testing, or basically how you can make that transition from manual testing into automation in the smoothest, quickest way as possible. So as mentioned, I'm a TestCraft engineer here at Perforce. I've got a little over 6 years of QA experience and a little over 4 years of Fodder experience. And I've been working over the last few years with TestCraft to do exactly what this presentation and this talk is about, which is helping organizations to enhance the operations by introducing those efficient automation solutions and practices. And basically what I would like to do today is to talk to you a little bit about the general challenges of today's QA's operations and the specific challenges of making that transition from manual testing to automation, and what's the best way, or a few tips and a few suggestions and recommendations and things that I've experienced over the last few years that would hopefully help you with that. So on today's agenda, we are going to talk about, first of all, the current state of testing in general, as mentioned, and the manual testing challenges specifically. We're going to talk about, do we even have to do that shift to automation? Because we've actually started by sort of making the assumption that we're doing that. So I'll try to sort of highlight what are the reasons, what are the main pains that organizations have today that even cause them to do that, and is it really that important, or why is it really that important? And then I'll try to highlight the 5 steps to making that switch, a few items to consider when you've actually come to the decision and understood that you do want and need to make that transition. And hopefully we'll have enough time at the end, a few minutes at the end, to also do a quick Q&A session. Okay, so let's get started, first of all, by talking about manual testing, the good versus the ugly, or, sorry about that, the pros versus the cons. So obviously when we're talking about manual testing, there's actually quite a lively discussion in the QA field right now about whether automation will or will not eventually replace manual testing fully or completely. Now, again, this is a topic that is worth maybe a complete different session, but obviously there are, most of the organization today, actually the main QA operation, or the largest part of it, or the largest percentage of QA done today is still manual. And the reason for that is that obviously there are a lot of advantages to the manual testing. In general, obviously, manual testing is done by humans. Okay, that is the fact that makes it inherently an advantage. We are using usually people who are business experts, meaning they know the application that they are testing in and out. They know what are the challenging areas that are worth focusing on or that are prone to have problems. They can make quick and easy adjustments, to different tasks that are coming or different changes that are presented in the application. And we know that today, obviously, there is a very rapid movement in the development. There are a lot of changes, a lot of new features being introduced all the time. There are a lot of, transformations made to those applications in the digital era and so forth. So the manual testers have the ability to really imitate what an end user, what a real user would do when he uses or they uses the app. The app. They are familiar again with the main challenges, with the main business flows. They know exactly what are the points that are worth checking and that people use the most, that might break, that had maybe issues in the past, and so on. Now, some of those advantages can be actually addressed as pros or cons, but I'll try to highlight both sides of those coins. So manual testing, obviously depending on the procedures, are usually not completely 100% structured because of those changes, because of those unexpected occurrences that could happen that a human can handle, where a machine might still have some troubles doing so. Pop-ups that come on the screen when you're not expecting it, changes that maybe the user wasn't expecting or didn't know that were released yet, and so on. So those are things that are, let's say, easier or more available for a human to handle than a machine that is designed to do a specific thing and handle a specific situation. And that, in turn, also encourages creativity of the testers. Because obviously the freedom that they have to basically do whatever they want as much as the technology allows them can give them the option to again, try something new or make a slight adjustment or try a new trick that would maybe reveal something that, again, wasn't expected or wasn't planned to begin with. And again, that's part of what I mentioned. Those are usually shorter scenarios where you try to find a specific result in a way that could give you the answer quickly. Okay, so those are pretty much, again, the basic advantages that I want to mention right now. When on the other hand, again, some of those could be described also from the other side of the coin as disadvantages. But one of the main disadvantages is that the manual testing is, again, really dependent on the procedures. It really varies between who's doing what and when, who's the manager, who's the tester right now, what happens, what environment they work in. So all of that makes it, I'm looking for the term, makes it very time-consuming on several aspects. It allows you only limited coverage because it takes longer to do things manually than when you use a computer or a machine. Obviously, computers, the main benefits of it are basically the speed, right? It takes time to set up the environment. It is usually detached from the development cycle to some aspect, so you can't really automate anything without the help of developers. If there are changes in the development, you are dependent on people letting you know that those changes were made. It's hard to keep up with those features, as I mentioned, that bottleneck of testing that comes when there are developers releasing changes all the time and different tasks assigned to them and different expectations from the managers and so on. So all of that, again, comes down to the fact that there are a lot of moving parts that the user needs to handle, and the ability to sort of make that efficient, make that cover and get the result that you really want, it makes it tricky, basically. So the entire process of doing the test, of getting the latest version from the developers, the one that you want to test, documenting everything that you do, making sure that you've really got everything that you want for the specific release and so on. All of that becomes really tricky to follow, really tricky to document, and so on. So I think that's the main challenge or the main pain that comes from the manual testing aspect. Again, and all of that eventually results in the fact that you don't cover as much of the app that you would like. The quality is compromised, and eventually you might release a product that is not in the quality that you would expect it to be. And again, we need to remember that those are humans doing it, and I've mentioned it in a word earlier, but the fact that there are different people working on different things, so some of them might be more familiar with specific areas of the product, some of them might be less familiar with specific areas of the product. People might go on a holiday and suddenly you need someone to fill in, and he might do things a little differently. So there is not, it is less easy to keep things consistent than when you have a machine that is programmed to do something. And actually, we've mentioned it as a pro as well, but another sort of con of it is that we're only talking about shorter test scenarios. So again, those limitations that I've mentioned make it hard to sort of cover the entire, user flow that a user might go through within an application, within this full journey within an application. So you might cover specific aspects of it, but miss other aspects of it. Okay, so when we're talking about the manual testing versus the automation, to some aspect, one of the main things that I think was raised from the previous slide is that we're talking about the structured versus the exploratory. Now, obviously, this is not to say that manual testing is completely not structured, and everyone do what they want and no one cares or knows how to handle it. But when we're talking about structured testing and we're talking about functionalities that are being checked in a structured manner, this is usually something that is more suitable for automation or for a machine rather than exploratory testing. That is also an important aspect, obviously, but this is more suitable usually for manual testers, as it is very hard to make a machine or provide a machine with that creativity that a tester needs in order to really reach those hidden areas in the application, and also just adjust to a specific task or need that exists right now, and not just something that was prepared in advance for that. Okay, so again, this is just in general to sort of highlight the state today of manual versus automation, and what are the challenges and what are the the pains of organization right now that they need to look at. So why do I believe that shifting to automation is critical? And there is a nice sort of representation of that that you can see here. So if we'll look at the ocean of test scenarios, as we call it, when we're talking about it's sort of divided here to test automation and exploratory, but I would beforehand look at actually the small letters here, and I would say there are the areas or things that we know that we need to check or that might break and so on, and that is only the tip of the iceberg. So those are the things that are very easy or relatively easy to find and test, and obviously those are the things that will automatically be attracted to do, because it's, again, easy wins. It's just, I know what I need to do, I know how to do it, and so on. But those are also the minority of possible scenarios that could occur for a user in our application. So the reason that we need the automation is that if we are able to get the automation to cover that part, which most of the users today spend most of their times covering. So what I'm saying basically is that today manual testers are spending most of their times actually checking, again, the risks that we know about, the tip of the iceberg, and the minority of cases that our application can present. If we are able to let the automation do that, and again, we can do that, at least in a very high percentage of cases, that gives us the time and gives the users and manual testers the ability to dive into the rest of those challenges, the things that we don't know, the places where we can be surprised, places where we can interact with the application and find something that we weren't expecting, things that we can maybe think about and even invent and see if it's true or not. So again, that just gives you the ability to shift your users to dive deeper and focus on things that you might not be able to do unless you have automation, because they're spending their time just, going through the same old things that they know of. Okay, so again, we have different people with different knowledge. We want to make sure that those things that we know about are handled by the machine, and we gather different people with different abilities and different ideas doing all the rest. Okay, so what are those pains, again, that organizations have today when we talk about embracing automation? So I'm going to go over the topics to begin with, and then I'll try to dive a little bit deeper into each one of them. So we're talking about data overload, some of the things I've mentioned on previous slides as well. But we're talking about data overload. Again, there are a growing number of tests and growing number of data that we need to use for each test that are based on the people requesting them, that are based on the changes that are made in the application, that are based on who we are getting the tasks from and who's performing the tasks as well. There is the test reliability aspect of it. Again, when we got a lot of people with different knowledge and doing different things, then you can have people also presenting just noise, things that maybe we already know about, things that maybe they've just done wrong. So we want to make sure that our tests remain stable and resilient as possible. And those three, I think, are actually related to each other in some aspects. So we're talking about the value that you get from testing. We're talking about the testing requirements from management and traceability. We're talking about making data-driven decisions. So this is basically understanding what is the value that we get from the test. What are the benefits of testing something with an automated solution, testing something with a manual solution, and making sure that we can translate that, okay, into structured processes where eventually we can make both the testers basically and those managers and executives make the decision based on not things that are gut feelings or a specific user that mentioned something, but on real data that we know we can rely on, that we know that we can follow and understand what happened, why, how was it tested, what are the findings, what do they mean, and so on. Okay, so basically we're talking about, again, that bottleneck of QA, getting a lot of tasks due to a lot of changes, a lot of features, a lot of changes. How do we manage that? How do we make sure that the processes are working in a way that we can get the value from them easily? How to make sure the test remains stable with those changes? And how do we make sure that everything that we do actually translates into decisions and into improving the quality of our product? So that was a lot of theory, a lot of general talk. And now I want to speak a little bit about what are the actual steps that we need to take? What are the things, what are the topics that we need to consider when we actually try or decide to make the transition from manual testing to automated testing? And in my humble opinion, I would say, and again, I'm sort of circling back to a topic that I mentioned earlier. I wouldn't recommend an organization to go directly from full manual testing into full automated testing. Okay, this is a process, and I'll speak exactly about that in a second. But as you've seen, there are a lot of advantages and a lot of things that you can only do today, or that you can do better today with manual testing. The idea of the automated testing is to complement it, is to allow us to get the best of both worlds, to get as much value as we can get, both from the manual aspect and the automated aspect. Okay, so the step one that we're talking about is showing the ROI to various stakeholders. So again, obviously when we make the transition or ask to make the transition from manual testing to automation, we need to prove the value of it, right? We need to explain why we want to do it, what would we gain from it, and we need to prove it on different levels. So there is the manager's level, and I'm talking about right now mostly the QA manager's level. Okay, how would it save me the time? How would it improve the product quality? What's the cost of not doing that or taking a different approach? And as I've mentioned, from my point of view, this basically means that if you don't go to automation, whatever solution you choose to do that or whatever way you choose to do that in, you are still sort of looking away from parts of your applications and things that could break and that users could encounter, and hoping that whatever you do right now will be enough. And usually that's not the case, again, because of the pace of the technology. So we got the QA managers and we got the daily practitioners, those who actually do the work. How would that help them? So we're talking about taking away repetitive and boring tasks out of their day. Or I wouldn't call it boring necessarily, but we're talking about, again, this focus that testers have today on doing the things that they already know, the things that they've tested, they just want to make sure that are still working the same way. And this might become tedious at some point. We want our testers to be original. We want them to be creative. We want them to be able to explore different functionalities and different options. Okay, that also allows us to leverage those users in different way. It opens their mind and eyes to different things that maybe they didn't think about or didn't see before. Okay, now when I've spoken earlier about proving the ROI to the managers, I've spoken mainly about the QA managers, but it's not only them, obviously. So even if we're taking it another level, we're talking about the organizational ROI. Right, so we're talking about what would the entire organization gain from the fact that it now has users or business experts that are more connected to the technical aspect of things, that can take part in additional processes of the organization, maybe even make that transition again from manual testing to automation testing. Make that transition from, product, business. There are different personas who do tests in different organizations, and have them, take part or encounter and see and interact with more people within the organization, getting better coverage for their application. Again, obviously improving the quality of the product. Okay, so again, the first step is to sort of prove what are the benefits and what are the values of making that transition to all the relevant personas, because we want everyone on board, right? A lot of time people will say, okay, we have the way that we work and we're satisfied with that. And sometimes people are scared of changes or scared of what it might mean. So we need to make sure everyone are on board. If you're going to have, a tester that isn't on board for that, it doesn't, the managers could say what they want and they could, and most people would do what they tell them, but they wouldn't do it in the same passion. They wouldn't do it in the same quality that they would have done it if they understand the value and the importance of it. And the other way around, you can have a specific person, that is very passionate about it and want to do that and want to, change things. But if you don't have the managers on board with them, they'll probably, get at some point, a stop sign from someone. Okay, so the next part, and that is very important, is to decide which tests to automate. So obviously we have a lot of things that we do in QA and testing. What are the right things to actually take from that and automate them? And the questions to ask here are, first of all, what are the actions that are repeatable, that I can reproduce easily, that I can allow a machine, or let's say within quotes, to program a machine to do that for me? What are the things that would give me the most value to automate? Meaning, am I automating just something because it's easy and repeatable? Or do I have something that would actually save me the time and free up my time to do something else that would give me higher value? So we want to take those things where I, as a user, as a manual user, might fail or might spend a lot of time doing, and we want to automate those to get the highest benefit from it. And obviously, we need to make sure that it's repetitive, meaning a machine runs a test instead of a human, right? If running it again is impossible for different reasons, data changes in the application that occur due to that, the state of the of the machine after we've done something, and so on, then we can't really run the test again in an automated fashion. So this also needs to come into consideration. Okay, so we want to take the things that are repeatable, that I can reproduce easily, both on the specific actions that I perform and the entire test scope. And we want to take those things that would give me the higher value, in the sense that, I'm losing something by doing that as a human instead of using a machine to do that. So sort of part B of deciding which tests to automate is sort of in the procedure. What are the progress of moving to automation that I would make? So most organizations will follow this procedure. The three types of test cases that you would automate first. So the first one would be the unit tests. So the first two are actually done mostly on the development level. Okay, so the unit tests are those small components that the developers, as part of writing the code, as part of developing the software, want to make sure that work properly and as expected in the most basic sense, right? That they do what they're supposed to do as an independent unit. Then we want to move on to what we call the integration tests. So the integration tests are taking different, or in a sense, taking different unit tests, right, or different components, and making sure that the interaction between them also works and doesn't ruin anything else. So the reason that we'll go with these two first is that these are usually, in a sense, even before the business aspect of things. So we don't want to get what we call the DOA, a dead on arrival. We don't want to get, a snippet of code coming to the QA and trying to automate something that didn't work properly to begin with. Okay? So after we have that covered to some aspect, we can move on to those functional tests. And again, those are the tests that the user would do against the actual UI or against the actual application, where we will actually do some sort of end-to-end or mimic the user interactions and actually make sure that the functionality of a user trying to do something in our application works as expected. Okay, now this is so this was, again, a little bit about how to start and what we need to consider. But now I'm moving a little bit on how to actually do that. So a lot of times people, think big, and they want to say, okay, I want to, start with my most, complicated scenarios and more complex scenarios, and cover as much as I can with the big end-to-end flow and so on. That is a lot of time a mistake. And the reason for that is that you're going to spend a lot of time and not have anything really to show for it. What we want to make sure is that we get small goals, that we can show value for our work very quickly, very easily. This will create the backbones for the rest of the work later on. So we're going to start with a singular test and understand the process and understand how it works and see that it works. And then we can connect that both to the technical processes and to the business processes in this, or the organizational processes, as far as getting the actual feedback from the other business testers and from the other developers. And that is actually a very important part of it, because the entire idea is that that automation procedure connects the testing or the manual testing to the development in a very efficient manner. It makes them work very closely together because they get, or they are able to get, that feedback very quickly. They're able to present technical results very easily. So, and again, the last point here basically mentioned, it's much easier to replicate and scale small successes. So once you have something that you can show the value for it, it sort of frees up your time or makes it more convenient to continue working and scale it up later on. With that, and this sounds a little bit contradictory, but it's not, and I'll explain why. So although we are starting small, the idea is to learn fast in order to scale that in the long term. So you're starting small because you're thinking about the advantages or what you can do with that later on when you actually start scaling up. So the idea is, how can I get value right now? How will I benefit from it in the future? How do I scale it up later on for processes that will give me the benefit that I'm looking for? So you're creating the backbones, and you can create those reusable components that will help you get the benefits later on and have an easier job later on when you want to create the more complicated tasks, when you want to create the opportunities to expand, and so on. And obviously, once you've done all of that, once you've proved that there is a reason to actually go with automation, and you've decided what you want to automate and how you want to automate, you need to pick the right tool to do it to match your organizational structure. So that's basically mean who are the people who are going to be doing that, and what tools they could benefit the most to do that. So usually you would have the people, the automation engineers or those testers with technical skills, and they would usually use what I call the sort of legacy, not exactly, but sort of the a classic automation solution, Selenium and Appium. So they can code and they can enhance the test automation coverage with that. And then you'll have the developers who would want to accelerate that and get an easier execution, an easier or a quicker feedback loop. And they would enhance that with other tools that exist in the market. And then you have, again, those people who don't have those technical skills, your manual testers, but are experts on the business process, who want to move from manual to automation but don't have the ability to code. And for them, there are different types of solutions out there. Obviously, there are a lot of different tools that provide different value. I'm going to speak, obviously, a little bit more about TestCraft and explain how we address that. But that is a tool that is addressed for those people who don't have the technical skills but still want to enhance the automation process. Okay, so what are the advantages of making that transition or moving to a codeless or scriptless solution? We're talking about increasing the test automation coverage, obviously, both in setting up the framework, in creating the tests and maintaining them, modifying them. We're talking about, again, making that connection between the QA and the development resources. We're talking about complementing both sides of the equation. Again, we're talking about manual testers and automation that already exists maybe in our organization, and we can complement them and contribute more from our business knowledge. We can connect that to the entire DevOps cycle and the technical aspect as well. And again, make the entire process of testing more connected to the development and just quicker and more efficient. Okay, so when we're talking about scriptless or codeless versus the code-based testing, obviously I'm not going to go through all the text that exists here. We're going to give you the presentation. You're going to have it at your disposal. But when we're talking about the coded testing, okay, we're talking about things that are more based on the technical aspects of things and the technical knowledge of those who develop the test. Okay, that usually takes a little bit longer. It's more of a personal based and personal skills based operation. When we're talking about the business testers or codeless solutions, we're talking about a process that is a lot quicker. It is based on the system and not on a specific person, and can include more people with varying skills. And doing everything, creating the tests and using them and so on, becomes a lot easier in that sense. When we're talking about the test maintenance, then again, we have the ability or the need when you use code to actually dive into the code and understand what happens and try to understand how to fix it. And again, that is basically, again, going to the time consumption area. It takes a lot of time and a specific knowledge to do that. Where when you have a tool that can provide the self-healing ability and does it automatically for you, again, that makes the process a lot easier and require less effort from the user. And when we're talking about the test execution aspect of it, then again, we're talking about being more dependent on the local resources, let's call it, about the need to set up the environment and configure it properly based on the specific knowledge of a specific person. And when we're talking about the codeless solution, we're talking about the ability to do everything based on the tool, where a lot of people with different types of knowledge can go in and execute and manage their executions in a way that is built into the tool. So let's talk a little bit about TestCraft Codeless Selenium specifically. So TestCraft Codeless Selenium is a solution that allows you to create and maintain your automated tests, obviously without the need to use code, based on the abilities and advantages of Selenium. What we do is we provide a visual or codeless layer on top of it that allows, again, more people to participate in the process and make the process just easier and simpler and quicker, both for setting up the framework. So everything happens in the cloud. You don't need to download anything. You don't need to install anything. You can simply dive into the application and start working. So the process becomes a lot easier and quicker. And on the maintenance part as well, because we do have that self-healing mechanism, machine learning based, that allows us our tests to overcome changes that happen in the application automatically, without the need for the user to dive in and do it. Okay, so this is a little bit just a quick screenshot of what it looks like, or a visual representation of our AI-driven test maintenance. So you can see that our algorithm basically takes into account a dynamic set of values for each element. So this is a specific element that was identified on a specific point of time. We got a lot of different attributes, and our algorithm maps it out. And I'm not going to get too technical about it right now, but I'm going to try to prove it in a second. Maps out the element not based on a specific attribute that a developer decided upon or that a user decided upon, but above a machine learning capability, okay, that allows us to understand the relationship between that element and the entire page of the application at the given time, which again allows us in turn to overcome changes in the application automatically whenever a test is being run. Okay, you get the ability for unlimited scalable automation, meaning you can actually run on different devices, different setups, and you don't need to control everything locally on your computer. You got a cloud-based execution and reporting mechanism that you can configure and scale for your needs. So everything is done and centralized in one tool. Okay, and that is also true for the test management itself. So your tests are stored in the application itself. They are executed in the application itself, and you can manage everything in one place. You can create the test, you can run them, you can view the results in the cloud at any time from different places. And of course, the smart debugging capability, which allows you to get different overview over what happened in a test. You get a screenshot, you get a video, you can add more advanced features. You can dive in during runtime and understand what happened at a specific time. You can configure your elements and configure your actions to perform in a specific way, and all of that, again, without the need to use code. So with that little teaser, let's move on to a quick demo where I'm going to try to prove that it actually works as I mentioned right now. So I'm going to share my screen with my TestCraft instance. And I'm sorry about that. And I'm going to create, so this is the TestCraft tool, the TestCraft solution. Again, no need to download or install anything. I'm logging in and I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call it Bitrix, which is an online CRM system that I'm just going to use for this this example. And I'm going to do a login test, something very simple to begin with. I'm typing up the URL. I've got a specific platform defined by default, but I can obviously run on other browsers as well. And I'm just going to start building the test. So you can see I don't need to configure anything. I can simply dive into the application and start creating a test. And I'm going to try to prove, again, the speed and ease of use, both for creating the test and modifying them. So on the left side, you see the test flow as it's represented on a virtual canvas. On the right-hand side, you're going to see in a second the application itself being executed on a remote machine in our cloud. Okay, so we need to set up the framework, and hopefully we're going to see it running in a second. Okay, so we can see now the application itself, and I'm going to start very easily. I'm interacting with the elements, and I'm just typing in my data, same as I would have done in the real world as a user. And everything that I do is being stored into a model of my test execution. So again, I don't need any technical skills here or any automation knowledge. I simply do what I would have done as a manual user, and each step is being stored into my automated script or into my automated model that is also configurable in a very easy fashion later on if I want to change data, if I want to change the action that I perform, and so on. Now, a test to me is going somewhere, doing something, and validating the results, right? So we're doing a login test right now. I can go here and validate that this element is present on the screen. And basically, I've got my first test ready, right? And that took me about 2 minutes to do that. So I already have a test that I can run automatically at any time and get the value from, and I don't need to do a login test ever again, right? I can free up my time to do other things. Okay, now when we're talking about test automation or saving time, we're talking a lot of times about reusability, right? We want to be able to take components, and we don't want to create them and have to modify them in different places every time. So what I can do, I can take this login part. So this is a login test, but maybe I want to do the login as part of another test, which is not testing the login itself, but actually doing something else, but I need to log in order to do that. So right now, very easily, you could see I've just collapsed together or grouped together a set of steps and turned it into a reusable component. Okay, so if I'm going to create a new test right now, let's call it my employees test. I can start, I don't need to log in again. I can actually just start by adding that component that I've created. Run it. And this will go through the login process and allow me to continue building the test from there. So again, we're deploying a new session for each of these tests. We're going to get a new browser. We're going to go through the login process. And these tests could be scheduled to run at predefined times. They could be, again, linked to your CI/CD pipeline to run every time that you deploy a new version. So I've gone through the login process, and now I want to add a new step to my actual test. So I'm going to click this employee section, and maybe I want to make sure that my company structure as presented here is correct. So I'm going to go to the marketing department. I'm going to click it, and I want to verify that I actually got to the right department here. So I'm going to do another verification here and verify that I got the actual text here. So again, I'm reusing a component, and that's a very important aspect and a best practice for it. We want to make those repeatable actions, right? We've talked about it. We want to make those repeatable actions and want to use them and continue. So I've just created another test, and it took me a little less than a minute, I think. So I've actually just created 2 tests with less than 5 minutes, right? Automated, repeatable tests that I don't need to run again manually at any time. But what do I do if something changes? Right? Let's say that something did change about my application. How do I handle it? If I was using a different automation solution, I would need to go to the code and I would need to actually, figure out what changed and figure out how I can handle that. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do that type of change. I'm going to show you how TestCraft's machine learning ability allows you to overcome that automatic. So I'm actually going to run the same test. And let's see what happens. So far, we're doing the same thing. We're logging in. Now I want to check the marketing department. But if you notice, I've actually changed both the position and the name of this tab. Now, with a different automation tool or a tool that doesn't have the machine learning capabilities, your test would probably fail right now due to the inability to identify this element. Now, this test, as you can see, actually failed as well, but this is actually expected and planned. The reason for that is that I was checking the text of this element. You can see here in the screenshot that we get out of the box that we actually clicked the right element, but we were looking for a different type of text. So again, this is the feedback loop that I've mentioned earlier. I created the tests, I ran them, and I can see the report and debug them easily in the same tool online, and I can now go and maybe change it if I've done something wrong, or go to the developers and tell them, something went wrong here, you need to fix this. Okay, so this is basically, again, a basic overview over the system ability and how an automation tool could help you when you create tests quickly and execute them without necessarily changing the entire organizational structure and the way that you do QA in your organization. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing right now, actually, and I'm going to go back to our presentation. So to summarize, basically, I guess the message that I wanted to convey today is that we're living in a digital era that moves really, really fast. That in hand basically sets the challenge for organization where they, as I see it, must move in some way to the automation era or automation procedures. But you can't do that, just decide that you do it. It's not that easy. So what I wanted to say, again, is that you need to think about how you do it and what would be the best way to make that transition in a way that won't be too shocking to your organization, that will allow you to leverage your organization's and your even personal abilities in a way that would be acceptable, that would not require too much effort, too much time, too much resources. So you need to think about what are the things that you want to do, how you want to do that, what would be the best way to do that. And I think, again, I've spoken about it. I hope that some of the best practices and some of the topics that I've mentioned were a good starting point for you to consider. And obviously, you need to choose the right tool in order to accompany that in your organization the best way, based on how your organization works and what would be the benefit that you can get from it, or what are the resources that you have today that you can leverage in order to do that. Obviously, if you do feel that TestCraft is the right tool for you, or that if you're looking for a codeless automation solution, we'd be happy to continue the discussion in a different place. So before we wrap it up, I guess we might have a few more minutes for some questions from the audience. Shelby, have we got anything?
Yes. The first question from the audience asks, is there a recommended practice around automating a manual test scenario?
Okay, so again, when I can talk mostly from my TestCraft knowledge. So the way that we do it is on a model base. So you're just interacting with the application itself, and you're doing what you would have done as a manual user, the process that you are already familiar with. You don't need to learn a lot of different technologies and a lot of things that are different from what you already know. And that comes up as a test step and stored automatically. As I've mentioned, or as a best practices around automating a manual test, is to create that from small pieces and reusable components. You want to create different, backbones to your test that you can use later on and control very easily. So if something does change, or if you need to modify something, you can control it easily, and you don't need to go through through an ocean of elements and steps and try to figure out where you are. So it becomes a lot easier to automate the manual tests and modify them later on if you do it with small reusable components. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Perfect. The next question from the audience asks, in your experience, what is the average time frame for going from manual to automated testing?
So that's a good question. I can't say that I really have a definitive answer for it, because it really depends on what are your goals to begin with. But what I can say is that depending on those goals and depending on how you approach it, to get value or to get automation set up that you already see some benefit from could be a matter of between hours to days to weeks in some cases. So again, it depends on the resources, obviously, that you can give to it. It depends on the dedication and exactly how you chose to do it and which tool you use. But if you're doing it the right way, then it shouldn't take long at all.
Great. The next question asks, does TestCraft support testing of complex web apps?
Okay, so the answer is yes, of course. The question of what is a complex web app or how is, again, open, I guess, for interpretation. But the idea is that exactly because of what I've mentioned, the fact that we have that machine learning ability and the fact that you can overcome changes and dynamic elements automatically, and you have a smart tool to do that, obviously makes it possible. So again, we can definitely handle both dynamic elements and more complex and dynamic applications as well.
Great. The next question asks, how can AI ML help in manual test reduction and business testers empowerment?
So again, it depends on exactly how it is leveraged, and different tools will give you different solutions for it. But I guess, again, as I've mentioned, that I think the main point that it helps you with is that it helps you because of that rapid changes that we mentioned, because of those frequent development releases and new features that are being introduced. The AI allows you as a user to not have to spend a lot of time eventually trying to figure out what went wrong and fixing it. A lot of times in different automation tools, you are ending up spending more time trying to fix broken tests, whether it's due to a good reason that they broke or whether it's, you can't understand the reason maybe that it broke. And you end up not spending as much time actually testing. So I think the benefit of the AI mechanism is it allows you to focus on the actual testing aspect of things and not actually managing the automated tests.
Perfect. I think the last question that we'll have time for is, does TestCraft support web apps that are hosted on-prem?
Yes, so we have, it's a good question. We run on the cloud specifically, so we need access to the applications eventually, right? There are different ways to get that access, from IP whitelisting to setting up a complete VPN connection and so on. But the answer is yes, we can access both cloud and on-prem and lower environments of applications.
Awesome. Well, I think that is about all we have time for. If we didn't get to your question, we'll reach out to you via email after the webinar. So thank you to our audience for your attendance and participation today. And thank you, of course, to our presenter, Nimrod. We hope to see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.